I'm Mark Golub, and front and center in the news almost everywhere is the agreement made in Geneva between what's known as the P5+1, though we're essentially speaking of the United States and the Obama administration, with the Iranian government regarding Iran's nuclear program. On Saturday night, November 23rd, President Obama went on national television to make this dramatic announcement.
For the first time in nearly a decade, we have halted the progress of the Iranian nuclear program, and key parts of the program will be rolled back. Iran has committed to halting certain levels of enrichment and neutralizing part of its stockpiles. Iran cannot use its next-generation centrifuges, which are used for enriching uranium.
Now, here are some of the main points of the agreement. First, it's only a 6-month interim agreement. During these 6 months, this agreement commits Iran to doing the following things, which are meant to impede its nuclear weapons program. 1, construction of the plutonium-producing reactor will stop. 2, Iran will allow inspectors into its production facilities, which is a first and which the administration argues should alleviate fears that Iran is building or stocking hidden enrichment facilities. 3, Iran will permit inspections every single day at the 2 main enrichment facilities. 4, Iran may no longer enrich to 20%, but obviously may enrich to a lesser percentage. 5, Iran may not add to its number of existing centrifuges. And 6, nor may Iran increase its stockpile of lower-grade uranium without converting it to safer material. In return for Iran's implementing these limitations, the West agrees to unfreeze some of Iran's assets and funds being held in foreign banks, and to permit Iran to begin selling its oil products. This should generate for Iran some $7 billion in revenues. Is this agreement a marvelous breakthrough, a diplomatic breakthrough to be celebrated? Or is it a colossal mistake in which Iran has suckered the West into easing sanctions? Of course, there are 2 basic reactions to this 6-month agreement worked out by Secretary of State John Kerry and Iran's negotiating team. One expresses significant mistrust of Iran, though there is hope that Iran will, in fact, put a halt to its nuclear weapons program. The other reaction is more severe, that Iran has made a fool out of the United States. From Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu came out strongly in opposition to the agreement, and this is what he said.
מה שהושג אמש בז'נבה איננו הסכם היסטורי, זו טעות היסטורית. היום העולם הפך למקום הרבה יותר מסוכן, משום שהמשטר המסוכן ביותר בעולם עשה צעד משמעותי להשגת הנשק המסוכן ביותר בעולם.
In America, some of the administration's strongest supporters in Congress have also expressed real concern about the agreement. Chuck Schumer, Democratic senator from New York, said he's, quote, disappointed, unquote, with the agreement because the West seems to be giving up far more than Iran is. Speaking to WCBS Radio, Schumer said, Iran simply freezes its nuclear capabilities while we reduce sanctions. That is not a proportionate agreement. And at the annual Zionist Organization of America's dinner on Sunday night, the evening's keynote speaker was former Arkansas governor and former presidential hopeful Mike Huckabee, who had this to say.
I watched the president last night speak. You know, it must be pretty significant when he opens up to make a nationally televised speech at 10:30 at night. And I listened with shock. And I thought, it is apparent that he actually believes that he can trust the Iranians. The same people that deny the Holocaust, the same people that shoot 20-year-old women in the streets because they disputed a rigged election, The same people that not only once held Americans hostage, but on this very night continue to hold an American pastor hostage. I assure you that a nation that will hold Americans hostage and offer nothing is a nation that cannot be trusted. And if anybody believes in the integrity of the Iranians in this undertaking, all I can say is I would like to believe it. But I'd like to believe in leprechauns and unicorns too. But I don't.
Also at the ZOA dinner, ZOA National President Mort Klein was unequivocal in his criticism of the agreement.
This deal that was just signed yesterday does not end any part of the nuclear infrastructure. It leaves it intact. The 19,000 centrifuges are not destroyed or dismantled. They're simply stopped temporarily. The uranium, not destroyed. No facility that makes centrifuges is being destroyed. The plutonium facility, an alternate way to get nuclear weapons, is going to remain there, not being used, but not being destroyed. So he's done nothing to reduce the ability of Iran to get nuclear weapons. He simply postponed it for a few months. This is irresponsible.
Well, for more reaction to this interim agreement, we're so pleased to have on our phones right now the Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee and a member of Shalom TV's panel of commentators, David Harris. David, thank you for joining us.
Mark, it's always a pleasure.
So, David, you've written an op-ed piece yourself, but in general, summarize for our audience, what's your view of the interim agreement that's now been agreed to by the United States, the P5-1 plus one, and then Iran?
I think the most important thing is to acknowledge the fact that the agreement has already been reached, which means that we can all spend as much time as we want trying to question the process, raise issues, but in a sense that's water under the bridge. The bigger question for us is what happens now going forward, both in this interim period of 6 months and as the negotiators work towards what they call a comprehensive deal. And here I think we have to be completely vigilant and clear-eyed about both the risks and the opportunities. But I don't think it's helpful to dwell too much now on the past or to ascribe unfair motivations to the administration. Rather, let's focus on getting the best possible deal we can, and also at the very same time trying to ensure that we can help bridge the obvious differences between the United States and Israel, as well as America's Arab allies in the region, which until now have been quite obvious and very pronounced.
Well, you forgive me, but I understand what you're trying to say, and there's something very wise in it. And you know, whenever we speak to you, there's not only insight but wisdom, and I appreciate it very, very much. The problem is that there are a lot of people who are saying this was a serious mistake. And when I read the first release that came out of the AJC today, I felt, although it was said in a very, how should I say, circumspect way and with dignity, I thought there was a suggestion that there were things about the agreement which troubled the AJC and which troubled you. And when people see that this agreement fails to dismantle any of the 1,900 estimated centrifuges, it fails to demand the extraction of the enriched uranium, it permits Iran to continue to enrich uranium when the United Nations seem to say that there should be no enrichment permitted at all. There are people who are saying, it seems to us that the agreement itself is so flawed that it makes the future more difficult, not less difficult. And one of the things that I did want to hear you speak to was whether you were surprised that the agreement that Secretary of State Kerry was willing to enter into, and which the Obama administration now has endorsed publicly on television, whether it surprised you that it did allow Iran to continue to enrich uranium, which, from what I understand, David, would only be used for nuclear weapon purposes. What's your sense of all this?
Yeah, again, I have my own questions about the negotiating process. I have my own questions about the interim deal, and as you said in the AJC press release, which was issued Saturday evening within minutes of the announcement of the deal, we raised a set of 7 questions about the deal, trying to flesh out the details, because the devil is always going to be in the details of such a deal. But the point I'm trying to make is that's already behind us, and people can shout from the rooftops as much as they want about what happened, but what happened happened. There's a deal. We like the deal. We don't like the deal. There's a deal, and the deal will be operative for the next 6 months. And we have, it seems to me, certain priorities right now, certainly at AJC. One is to try and ensure that whatever is in the deal, however flawed the deal might be to some, whatever's in the deal will in fact be verified and verifiable. And secondly, that as the negotiators now proceed to focus on the comprehensive deal, as they call it, that the concerns of organizations like AJC and the concerns of countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are taken into account and not neglected. So yeah, we have an interim deal now, which has some serious issues. Number one, does it or does it not recognize Iran's right to enrich uranium? If you listen to Secretary of State Kerry, and he was on all the Sunday news shows, he says the answer is no. No one has given Iran the right to enrich uranium. He was very clear.
I don't understand that.
But at the same time, the Iranian foreign minister, speaking to the media, was equally clear in saying that, yes, this recognizes Iran's right to enrich uranium, and I think he said that it's mentioned in 2 places in the 4-page agreement that recognizes that right. So right from the get-go, you have this fundamental difference on the right to enrich uranium. What's also true, Mark, I think is more indisputable, is that the basic architecture of the Iranian nuclear program remains.
Yes.
It's not being dismantled. According to the details of this deal, it's being kept in place, and in a few places, it's being rolled back a bit. But the basic architecture is there, which means that the basic ability of Iran to, if it wishes, try to sprint at some point down the road, after these 6 months, toward a bomb and the means to deliver it remains intact. The negotiators for the P5+1 would say that's for the second part of the negotiation. That's when we talk about not the interim, but the comprehensive. It remains to be seen, though, whether the negotiators will be able to achieve a dismantling, full or at least partial, of the Iranian nuclear infrastructure that today is probably capable of building a bomb and delivering the bomb with its ballistic missiles.
You know, Prime Minister Netanyahu has pointed out time and time again that 19 countries produce nuclear energy for civilian use without engaging in enrichment, without centrifuges, without creating heavy water. Why should Iran be enriching uranium at all, David? Can it be, from your understanding, can it be for peaceful purposes?
I'm sure that the Prime Minister is absolutely right. He's absolutely right. And that's why we have the exact same question. If Iran is really talking about peaceful energy, well, as you said, there are a number of countries in the world that might even be higher than 19, actually, including neighboring countries like Canada, which do not at the same time enrich uranium, do not at the same time today, Mark, if I may correct the number you used earlier, if I heard it right, now has 11,000 centrifuges, and also is constructing a plutonium processing center in Arak, a city in Iran. And for your listeners, those who, like myself, didn't do particularly well in high school physics, there are 2 basic ways to get to the bomb. One is by enriching uranium, for which you need these centrifuges, and the second is through plutonium, which is what the Iraq Center is all about. So there's no question in our mind that the Iran program is all about the capability to build the bomb. Whether they actually build the bomb or not, they will have the capability to build a bomb and the ability to deliver the bomb, which is what their ballistic missile program is all about. Unless the Western negotiators are able to tackle those issues in the coming months, then there'll be lots of reason for disappointment in what emerged from this whole process. Mm-hmm. And not just disappointment, but even more danger.
Yes.
Real danger, especially for the frontline states, Israel and the Arab countries in the region who are petrified by the prospect of an Iranian bomb and who are petrified by the prospect of Iranian ascendancy, if not hegemony, in the region.
You know, David, if you turn on the talk shows right now, talk shows are having a field day, asking all kinds of questions, including what may have prompted this agreement. Does John Kerry want to leave a legacy? Does President Obama want to deflect attention away from Obamacare? And I don't want to ascribe any malicious, even negative, pejorative incentives here to what may have motivated the American administration. But it does seem so strange to me. And one of the things that seems the most strange is that the President and the Secretary of State decided to enter into an agreement which they knew Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Israeli cabinet, was very much against. And you know that Netanyahu has reacted very strongly. It seems like Israel's opposition to this agreement didn't matter to President Obama and the administration. So, David, does this agreement signal in your mind any kind of breach in U.S.-Israeli relations?
Look, I think it's clear that there is tension in the U.S.-Israel relationship. That's clear, and it can't be papered over or glossed over, Mark. It's clear because the Prime Minister of Israel has chosen to go public in a very direct way and challenge the White House, the most important ally of Israel in the world, and associate the White House with what it calls a mistake of historic dimensions.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about very, very loaded language here.
Yes.
So no one can paper over the fact that there is a major difference here between two countries that should be on the same page because they presumably have the same shared goal of stopping Iran from getting the bomb. But it's also important, I think, when we talk about this, not to speak about Israel in isolation, because there are other countries in the region who share Israel's concern.
Yes.
Maybe they haven't been quite as vocal as Bibi, the Israeli prime minister, but they're no less concerned. In fact, they may be more concerned because, unlike Israel, they don't have their own military capability to deal with Iran. They have to rely on someone else, the United States, for example. But if they no longer have confidence in the American willingness to stand by them against Iran, then what do they do next? So I think it's really about the United States now trying to engage both Israel and our Arab allies in the region and address the fact that there is this gap, there is this breach, and it needs to be repaired. The United States has interests in the Middle East that include but go beyond Iran, and we need allies. The United States is a global country. We need allies. We cannot retreat, nor should we retreat. And that means not neglecting those relationships with our allies. And that's why in my op-ed, which was published yesterday in the Jerusalem Post and the Huffington Post, I spoke about what I thought was the immediate need to address this breach in the relationship, this gap between the United States and Israel, the United States and the Arab countries, and sooner rather than later. The only beneficiary of this, Mark, frankly, is Iran. And that's the last country we should want to benefit from a breach.
I want you to expand one more moment on that, David, and I want our audience to understand. I want to put again the comments you make into a greater context for our audience, because we're used to, David, seeing a certain kind of talk television, whether it's MSNBC, whether it's Fox, whether it's CNN. And I want our audience to understand, I'm talking here to a leader of one of the major institutions on the American Jewish scene. And most leaders who are responsible, as David Harris is, want to maintain always a positive relationship to any American administration. The Jewish people and the state of Israel do no good at all for themselves or Israel if they ever alienate an American administration. So what a David Harris or a Malcolm Hoenlein or any of the people who are helping to lead American Jewry, when they speak on these issues, they must choose their words carefully, because they do nobody any good if they ever become partisan in their public pronouncements, or if they, in some way, in a disrespectful way, criticize an administration. And what you've heard David say a moment ago was so right on. What he is saying is, and it's courageous. David, you've always been courageous in walking this fine line you have to walk. But what David is saying is, yes, there is, in some way at the moment, a discord between Israel and the American administration. And what he is urging here is some kind of healing of any breach that might occur as a result of the way in which Netanyahu and Obama and the Israeli government and the American administration believe it's the best way to go forward. So I come back now to you, David, and I want, in that context, I recognize you can only say so much, and I'm not asking you to be critical of anybody that you don't want to be critical of, but I want you to explain. You have been very forthright in saying, yes, this reflects some kind of, you use the word breach. I want to know what you think should be done now, either by Israel or the American administration or by American Jewry, to keep the relationship as strong and as vibrant as possible when this Iranian nuclear issue is the most volatile issue I've seen in terms of the American administration relationship. What's your prescription here?
Mark, first of all, thank you for what you just said, and I want to be clear for those who are following this on Shalom TV that what it means is that a group like AJC is strictly nonpartisan and strictly independent, and that means that we understand that we need to be able to engage with the people who make decisions, and those others who simply want to shout and scream and yell and accuse may have a momentary sort of feel-good experience in sort of letting it all out. But at the end of the day, it doesn't move the needle. It simply marginalizes them. If you can't deal with the people who make the decisions, then you're not on the playing field. And I think that friends of Israel, friends of the U.S.-Israel relationship, need people who are on the playing field. And that requires both nonpartisanship and it requires strict independence. And yes, it requires a measure of, call it diplomacy and tact. Otherwise, you're talking to yourselves and you're talking to your bleachers, and that may make you feel wonderful, but it does nothing for the issues we care about. The goal of the exercise at the end of the day is to stop Iran from achieving nuclear weapons capability that could threaten the state of Israel, that can challenge American security interests, and that can disrupt the entire Middle East as we know it. That's the goal of the exercise. And everything we do, the American Jewish community, AJC, friends of the relationship, everything should be focused on that one goal. Mm-hmm. How do we effectively stop Iran? And since most of us don't have the diplomatic and military tools on our own to achieve it, as individuals, members of a synagogue, or as members of an organization like AJC, we have to rely on our ability to make the case, to make the arguments in the public space and with those officials who make the decisions, arguments that are persuasive, arguments that resonate, arguments that make them think that, yes, this is a point worth taking into account. So we're focused on trying to make those arguments as if you will, smartly as we can. Mm-hmm. We're focused on trying to ensure that the U.S. and Israel stay on the same page, because both countries have too much to give each other, to support each other in dealing with Iran, to allow for any kind of gap or breach. And we have to understand that whether some like it or not, there is now a momentum towards a second stage of negotiations for a comprehensive agreement with Iran. And rather than stay on the sidelines and simply carp or fetch, let's get involved in trying as intelligently, as thoughtfully, as rationally as we can to make the arguments to our officials, to our lawmakers, about the kind of agreement we think is necessary if diplomacy is going to work. That's what AJC is all about. That's what we're trying to achieve. And to those on the right who simply want to accuse everyone of replicating Munich in 1938, that's their right, but it achieves nothing. And to those on the left who argue that any deal is a good deal and that anything other than military is worth it, they've learned nothing from history. So we're in neither camp. And that's the space I think that's most important. So I would invite your listeners and your viewers, if they understand and agree with this approach, to visit us at ajc.org, our website, to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at AJC Global, to become part of an organization that's on the playing field and that's trying as thoughtfully and as independently as we can, recognizing the stakes involved, to make a difference. At the end of the day, the goal is not just to be right, it's to make a difference, and that's what we're trying to do.
David Harris, you always bring insight and clarity to issues of the day. I appreciate the courage with which you've helped us understand over the years some of the most important issues facing world Jewry, and I thank you so very much, as always, for sharing your thoughts with us on Shalom TV.
Thanks, Mark.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
The thoughts of David Harris, Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee. You know, everyone wants to resolve the Iranian nuclear threat with diplomacy. I just find it very hard to believe that Iran is not scamming the West when its current President Rouhani bragged openly and publicly in writing that he pulled the exact same stunt on the West when he was Iran's principal negotiator. And I was genuinely surprised that the Obama administration took this deal. But I could be wrong. I certainly hope I am. And I very much want to know what you think. Please share your thoughts with me. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I would love to read some of your comments on Shalom TV. And by the way, Shalom TV will have all of Mike Huckabee's address to the ZOA, as well as our exclusive coverage of this year's ZOA Gala coming up on Shalom TV in the next few days. My thanks to Sloan Copeland and Serge Goldberg in the control room, and to Carol Lilienthal for producing this edition of In the News. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.